The jingling sound of wind chimes echoed through the cold air of a Christmas Eve night in the heart of the city. Neon lights from luxurious stores reflected on the damp streets, where small puddles shimmered in dazzling hues. Julian Kingsley stepped out of his sleek black sports car, his designer coat accentuating his polished yet arrogant demeanor. For this man, life was never short of glitz and glamour, or the staggering figures in his bank account. But tonight, surrounded by the perfection that so many dreamed of, Julian felt unsettled. The pressure from his family, the fake handshakes, and the hollow congratulations filled with hidden agendas made him feel trapped. "Marry Fiona," he sneered, his eyes glinting with sarcasm at the thought of his parents' proposition. A political marriage to consolidate power and wealth? He despised the idea. As he rounded a street corner, Julian stopped abruptly. In front of him, under the faint glow of a street lamp, sat a girl with disheveled hair and contemplative eyes. She huddled on an old rug, clutching a thin coat that barely shielded her from the cold. The only thing shining on her gaunt face was the determined glimmer in her gaze, one that refused to bow to misfortune. Julian was about to walk past her, but something made him pause. Perhaps it was the fragile yet striking beauty etched into her features. Or maybe it was the way she smiled softly as she handed the last piece of bread in her bag to another homeless man, even though she herself was clearly starving. He approached her, his eyes filled with curiosity and a hint of amusement. "Do you need money?" Julian asked, his voice cold but carrying the natural authority of someone used to getting what he wanted. The girl looked up, her bright blue eyes wary but unafraid. "Who doesn't need money?" she replied calmly, without a trace of hesitation. "But I don't sell my soul." Julian chuckled, and for the first time in months, he felt something more intriguing than the opulent parties he frequented. He crouched down and extended a hand toward her. "I don't need your soul. I just need you to help me with something. In return, I'll give you a chance to change your life." The girl hesitated, her eyes searching his. Julian's intense gaze made her curious. A bold proposal from a powerful man on a freezing winter night. Was it an opportunity or a trap? "My name is Ivy," she said after a long silence. "Good," Julian smirked. "Well then, Ivy, you're going to be my girlfriend, at least until Christmas is over." A simple agreement, yet neither of them could have predicted how profoundly it would change their lives. Welcome to today's story. Let us know in the comments which city you're tuning in from so we can see how far this tale reaches across the world. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. The soft golden glow of the dazzling crystal chandeliers bathed the Kingsley mansion in an aura of opulence. Gentlemen in impeccably tailored black suits and ladies in glamorous evening gowns filled the air with lively chatter and laughter. Yet amidst the grandeur of the evening, Julian Kingsley sat quietly at the corner of the bar, a glass of amber whiskey swirling in his hand. His piercing blue eyes scanned the room, exuding an air of haughty indifference that veiled an inner void. As the sole heir to Thomas Kingsley, the formidable founder of a powerful real estate conglomerate, Julian had long grown accustomed to the limelight and the relentless pressure that came with it. He possessed everything others envied: wealth, influence, and a magnetic appearance. But beneath the surface, Julian was a solitary figure, repelled by relationships defined by calculation and self-interest, a reality his father had tirelessly tried to impose on his life. Tonight, Thomas had delivered an ultimatum. Julian must marry Fiona, the daughter of the Davidson family, long-standing business partners, to secure the mutual interests of both families. "This marriage is a strategy," Thomas declared, his sharp gaze leaving no room for negotiation. Julian despised the arrangement. He met his father's demand with a sardonic smile. "Marriage isn't a business transaction, Father, and I am not a pawn for you to maneuver at will." Yet he knew Thomas wouldn't relent. Julian felt cornered, and in the depths of his defiant mind, a bold plan began to take shape. He would prove to his father that he was not a man to be controlled. The winter night was cloaked in a shroud of cold mist as Julian drove through the deserted streets near his office. Dim streetlights reflected off the damp pavement, and the usually inconspicuous old neighborhood unfolded before him. Thoughts of familial pressure clouded his mind, leaving him restless. As his car slowed at an intersection, he caught sight of a girl huddled at the corner of the street. Her black hair cascaded over her thin shoulders, her small face worn by the biting wind, yet her eyes gleamed with a quiet resilience. She wore a thin coat, clutching a battered backpack tightly, as if it held the entirety of her worldly possessions. Julian wasn't sure what compelled him to stop and step out of the car. Perhaps it was her gaze, a gaze unlike any he had encountered in his world of luxury. Fierce, unyielding, yet laden with sorrow. "What are you doing here?" Julian asked, his voice low and cold. The girl looked up, her eyes sharp with wariness. "I don't think that's any of your business," she replied, her voice hoarse yet firm. Julian smirked faintly. Her retort intrigued him more than it annoyed him. He hadn't expected someone in her circumstances to respond with such poise. "I have a proposition," he said, his tone turning more serious. "I need someone to pretend to be my girlfriend for an upcoming Christmas party with my family. In return, I'll pay you enough to change your life." The girl frowned, suspicion evident in her expression. "Why me? I don't think I belong in your world." Julian shrugged, his sharp gaze calculating. "You don't belong. That's precisely what makes you perfect. My family won't be able to accept you, and that's exactly what I need." She remained silent, her eyes revealing an internal struggle. It was clear this proposition wasn't simple, but at the same time she couldn't deny that the money could help her escape her current situation, maybe even rebuild her life from scratch. "My name is Ivy," she finally said, her voice soft yet resolute, "and I'll agree to your terms. But remember, I am not a puppet in your hands." The city sparkled with Christmas lights, the festive atmosphere filling every corner. Ornately decorated Christmas trees stood majestically outside luxurious fashion boutiques, their warm golden lights creating a scene both magical and cozy. The winter wind carried the enticing aroma of waffles and hot chocolate from small street stalls. Julian drove Ivy to one of the city's most luxurious shopping centers. Under the twinkling lights of high-end stores, Ivy felt as if she had stepped into another world. She tried to maintain her composure, but her wide eyes betrayed her amazement at the elegant dresses displayed behind glass windows. Julian entered an upscale fashion boutique where the price of a single item could easily equal a month's salary for the average person. The store staff immediately recognized him, offering welcoming smiles. "I need an evening gown for her," Julian said, casting a glance at Ivy. "Something elegant but understated." Ivy stood still, feeling awkward as every eye in the boutique turned toward her. She lowered her gaze, gripping the worn straps of her backpack tightly. Julian noticed her discomfort and spoke quietly. "Relax. You need to look confident or this entire plan will fall apart." Ivy looked directly at Julian, her eyes flashing with defiance. "I'll play my role well, as long as you don't ruin it." Julian raised an eyebrow, amused by her response. "We'll see." The following hours saw the boutique's staff meticulously tending to Ivy. Gowns were tried, high heels selected. Though she was initially self-conscious, Ivy quickly adapted, even asserting herself with sharp opinions about what she preferred to wear. "She doesn't just need to look beautiful, she needs to look intelligent," Julian remarked as he observed Ivy in a long black dress that hugged her slender figure, subtly highlighting her elegance. "My family won't be easily fooled." Ivy smiled, her reply unflinching. "You should worry about your own acting skills first. I just hope you're convincing enough as a decent boyfriend." Her words made Julian chuckle, a rare smile that even he didn't realize had surfaced. On Christmas Eve, the Kingsley family mansion glowed warmly under golden lights. Strings of twinkling bulbs were draped everywhere, from the elegant iron gates to the towering Christmas trees scattered across the grounds. White snow blanketed the roofs and gardens, creating a magical, fairy tale-like scene. Inside, the grand living room was the centerpiece of the evening. A massive Christmas tree stretched to the ceiling, adorned with shimmering glass ornaments, sparkling tinsel, and a radiant silver star at the top. The walls were lined with wreaths and red silk ribbons, blending perfectly with the flickering candlelight from silver candelabras. Servers in crisp black and white uniforms glided effortlessly among the guests, carrying trays of red wine, champagne, and exquisite hors d'oeuvres. The soft strains of Christmas music played from a grand piano, adding a refined yet cozy ambiance. The air was filled with the aromas of roasted meats, gingerbread, and hot chocolate, evoking an indescribable warmth. Julian entered the room with Ivy on his arm, and immediately all eyes turned toward them. Ivy wore a deep navy evening gown that hugged her figure, accentuating her natural elegance. A simple pearl necklace and her neatly styled hair made her appear every bit the refined lady. Her face remained calm, though her eyes betrayed a hint of nervousness. Julian, dressed impeccably in a black tuxedo, led her through the curious and skeptical gazes with his usual confident demeanor. Yet deep down, he too felt a flicker of anxiety. Could Ivy handle the sharp questions and probing stares of his family? As they reached the center of the room, Thomas Kingsley, Julian's father, stood waiting. A powerful man with sharp eyes and an intimidating presence, he exuded an aura of authority. Beside him was Fiona, the woman the family had chosen for Julian. Dressed in a striking red gown and with meticulously applied makeup, Fiona's expression revealed a barely concealed irritation. "Julian, you've finally arrived," Thomas said in a deep voice that was equal parts greeting and scrutiny. Julian nodded, giving Ivy's hand a reassuring squeeze before introducing her. "This is Ivy, my girlfriend," he announced. The room seemed to freeze for a moment. Fiona, who had been wearing a practiced social smile, instantly lost her composure. She looked Ivy up and down, her gaze dripping with suspicion. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, with curious and judgmental eyes fixed on the unfamiliar woman. Thomas narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing Ivy carefully before speaking. "Hello, Ivy. I don't recall Julian ever mentioning you before." Ivy smiled, doing her best to remain composed. "Hello, Mr. Kingsley. Julian mentioned that your family enjoys surprises." "I suppose he was right," she replied, her tone light but pointed. A few guests chuckled softly at Ivy's response, but Thomas remained unimpressed. He nodded, yet his sharp eyes seemed to pierce through her composed exterior. "Interesting," he said, shifting his gaze to Julian. "But is she truly your choice, or just a way for you to avoid responsibility?" The air grew heavy immediately. Julian felt his body tense as he locked eyes with his father, his voice filled with defiance. "Father, if I weren't serious, I wouldn't have brought her here. I hope you can respect my decision." Fiona, standing nearby, let out a quiet, cutting laugh. "Julian, if you want people to believe you, you'll need to do more than just this. One evening isn't enough to prove anything." Ivy felt heat rising in her cheeks. Fiona's biting words were like invisible daggers, but she kept her composure. "I agree with you, Fiona," Ivy said, her voice calm yet resolute. "One evening doesn't prove everything, but at the very least it shows I'm willing to stand by Julian, no matter what anyone thinks." The party continued, but an underlying tension lingered in the air. Ivy did her best to blend in, engaging with older guests and deftly navigating their pointed questions. Every now and then, she caught Julian's gaze, a mixture of surprise and admiration in his eyes. However, as the evening neared its end, Thomas called Julian and Ivy aside, his tone more commanding than ever. "Julian," he said, "I don't believe this charade of yours. If you truly love her, marry her. If not, you will marry Fiona. What will it be?" Julian froze, stunned by the declaration. He glanced at Ivy, who stood beside him, her expression betraying her shock. Her heart pounded, and one thought raced through her mind. This wasn't part of the plan. After a few tense seconds of silence, Julian replied decisively, "Fine, I'll marry Ivy." The room erupted. Fiona's jaw dropped, her eyes filled with indignation and fury. Thomas smirked coldly, as though he had anticipated this response. Ivy said nothing. She felt as though she was being swept up in a whirlwind beyond her control. Yet when Julian looked at her, there was an unexpected steadiness in his gaze, as if he was not only protecting himself but also her. The car rolled slowly down the snow-covered road. Snowflakes drifted silently outside the window, catching the golden glow of the streetlights and creating a serene yet melancholic scene. Inside, silence enveloped the space. Ivy leaned back in her seat, her eyes staring out the window without really focusing on anything. Her heart was still racing from the events of the Christmas party. She couldn't believe Julian had made such a monumental decision without consulting her. Pretending to be his girlfriend had been strange enough, but now he expected her to play the role of his wife? The game had gone far beyond what she could tolerate. Sitting beside him, Julian maintained his cold expression, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, as if everything was under control. Yet deep inside, he was far from calm. His father's gaze at the party and Thomas's sharp ultimatum echoed relentlessly in his mind. He knew he had pushed Ivy into a difficult situation, but it was the only way to secure his freedom. Finally, unable to bear the stifling silence any longer, Ivy turned to Julian, her voice cutting through the quiet. "What the hell were you thinking, Julian?" Her tone was a mix of anger and helplessness. "You made this decision without even consulting me?" Julian lifted his head, his cold eyes locking onto hers. "If I hadn't," he said in a steady, low voice, "my father would have forced me to marry Fiona. Do you think I had another choice?" Ivy let out a dry laugh, devoid of humor. "And you think dragging me into this ridiculous plan is a solution? What am I to you, Julian? A pawn you use whenever you see fit." Julian frowned, a hint of irritation flickering across his face. But he restrained himself, keeping his voice calm. "You agreed from the beginning. This is a transaction, Ivy. I didn't force you." His words cut deep into Ivy's pride, like a knife. She bit her lip to hold back her anger. Yes, she had agreed to attend the party, tempted by the money Julian offered, a sum that could help her restart her life. But marriage, that was an entirely different matter. "I agreed to help you at the party, not to be your wife," she exclaimed, her eyes blazing with indignation. "You don't get to decide my life for me." Julian sighed heavily and stepped out of the car as it stopped in front of the Grand Mansion gates. Without saying another word, he walked straight inside, leaving Ivy standing by the car, stunned and fuming. The mansion was bathed in the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, its snow-covered garden creating a scene of breathtaking beauty but chilling coldness. Inside, Julian stood by the bar, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. In the dim light, he looked like a marble statue, resilient, imposing, but unmistakably lonely. Ivy walked in, her steps heavy as she moved closer. She stopped in the middle of the room, her eyes glaring at Julian with anger and defiance. "Now tell me, Julian," she said, her voice hoarse from suppressed emotions. "What's your next move? Are you going to force me to do as you please?" Julian turned, his cold gaze meeting the fury in Ivy's eyes. He set his whiskey glass on the table and slowly walked toward her. "Listen to me, Ivy," he began, his voice low and firm. "I need you to be my wife. For 2 years." Ivy felt her whole body freeze. 2 years? She could hardly believe what she had just heard. "You're insane," she said, her eyes wide with disbelief. 2 years? You think I'd agree to be your wife for that long?" Julian didn't laugh, didn't mock her. His expression was utterly serious. "Yes, 2 years. After that, you'll be free, and I'll pay you enough money to do whatever you want." Ivy fell silent, her mind spinning. $1 million. That amount was staggering, enough to rebuild her life entirely. But being his wife for 2 years, living in a fake marriage, bound by rules and under the scrutinizing eyes of his family? "Why me?" she finally asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "You could choose anyone." Julian met her gaze, his sharp eyes softening slightly. "Because you're not like anyone else. You're straightforward, intelligent, and you don't try to take advantage of me. You won't make demands or ask for more. And most importantly, you're the person I've already introduced and declared to my family." Ivy bit her lip, a wave of hurt rising in her chest. While Julian's words seemed flattering, they still made her feel like a commodity being evaluated. But then, she reminded herself of the harsh reality of her life. She had nothing to lose, and this money could change everything. She turned away, walking toward the large window in the living room, her eyes staring into the snowy night. The dense darkness outside seemed to mirror the emptiness she felt inside. 2 years, she murmured, her voice quiet but resolute. "I'll be your wife for 2 years, but I want one condition." Julian raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk appearing on his lips. "What do you want?" Ivy turned back to him, her cold eyes locking onto his. "I want your respect. If you treat me like an object, I'll leave, no matter what our agreement is." Julian held her gaze unflinching. After a few moments of tense silence, he nodded. Deal. As Ivy left the room, Julian stood still for a long moment, watching her figure disappear down the hallway. His hand tightened around the whiskey glass, his expression contemplative. He told himself this was just a transaction, a temporary solution, but deep down he couldn't ignore the growing conflict within him. As for Ivy, when she entered the guest room assigned to her and sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion washed over her. She didn't know if this decision was the right one, but at least it was a chance to start over. No matter the cost, she would not allow Julian or anyone else to look down on her again. Are you still following the story? Comment pizza to let us know you're here. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any of our meaningful videos. The grand mansion, with its glass walls reflecting the city lights, now exuded an eerie silence. After the wedding, Julian and Ivy lived like strangers, each lost in their own world, separated by invisible yet heavy walls. As usual, Julian immersed himself in his busy schedule. He left the house early in the morning and returned late at night, his suit still immaculate and leaving behind indifferent notes on the table. The large kitchen was always bathed in a soft yellow light, with dinner served neatly, but no one ever sharing the meal. Ivy, facing this newfound isolation, felt as though she were caught in a game whose rules she didn't fully understand. Day by day, she quietly rearranged her life in the luxurious yet hollow house. Each time she looked into the large mirror in her bedroom, she couldn't help but wonder, what am I really doing here? Painful memories of her family and her former life lingered within her. Sometimes, as the gentle morning light streamed through the window, she thought of warm breakfast with her parents and the laughter that used to fill the small home they once called their sanctuary. Now, sitting alone in her cold, lifeless bedroom, she felt like a wanderer lost in the void. But Ivy refused to let herself sink into despair. She had dreams once, and her parents had taught her lessons in business and management, things she was now determined to put to use. She couldn't live under Julian's shadow or wait for his help. Instead, she began to take small steps towards standing on her own. During the day, she quietly read business books from the mansion's vast library, her eyes focused and determined. At night, when the light in Julian's room had gone out, she sat at the desk, analyzing the documents he had left behind. A thought began to take shape in her mind. I can make something out of what's been neglected. One afternoon, while tidying up Julian's desk, Ivy stumbled upon a dusty folder in the corner. It contained details about a small investment project in local stores that Julian had set aside and ignored. Reading through it, Ivy realized the immense potential being wasted. While the project might not yield immediate profits, with the right approach, it could become a turning point. Spending days researching and drafting a plan, Ivy decided to contact the partners listed in the documents, skillfully using Julian's name to leave an impression. She didn't expect immediate success, but with her sharp instincts and patience, she began receiving positive responses. The project gradually transformed from a discarded effort into a promising investment. One late evening, Julian returned from a long meeting. Entering his office, he noticed his desk covered with unfamiliar documents, detailed reports and business plans he didn't remember approving. Frowning, he picked up a folder and skimmed through it. The figures surprised him. Profits from a project he had once deemed meaningless now stood out. Holding the documents, Julian walked into the kitchen, where Ivy was seated with a cup of tea. The soft yellow light illuminated her face, making her appear both resolute and gentle. You did all this? Julian asked, his voice a mix of surprise and cold detachment. Ivy looked up, her gaze unwavering. Yes, that project had potential, and I thought I could do something with it instead of letting it go to waste. Julian felt a twinge of discomfort mingled with curiosity. The woman he had once thought of as merely a pawn now showed far more sharpness than he had anticipated. I don't recall asking you to handle this, he said, his tone cold as if masking his unease. Ivy took a sip of her tea, her voice calm but tinged with subtle meaning. You didn't. But I thought you'd like to know that not everything you overlook is without value. Julian stood still, his eyes fixed on her. Within him stirred a hard-to-define feeling, a mixture of respect and slight embarrassment. Late at night, The light from Ivy's study still shone brightly. Julian, descending from the rooftop gym, stopped in front of the door. He was curious why she always worked so late. Through the crack in the door, he saw Ivy focused intently on her laptop, with stacks of documents piled beside her. Her fingers tapped steadily on the keyboard, her eyes fixed on the screen. Under the soft glow of the desk lamp, her face bore signs of fatigue, but radiated determination and concentration. Julian stood silently, a wave of unease washing over him. This was the woman he had once thought of as merely playing the role of a fake girlfriend in a deceptive game. But now that image forced him to see her in a new light. She doesn't deserve to be dragged into all of this, he thought. A pang of guilt began to rise within him. The next morning, Julian woke earlier than usual. Instead of leaving breakfast preparation to the housekeeper, he stepped into the kitchen himself. Though he had no experience cooking, he made an effort to prepare a simple sunny-side-up egg dish. When Ivy entered the kitchen, her hair slightly tousled and her face showing signs of fatigue, she was surprised to see Julian standing by the counter, a pan in hand. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice filled with skepticism. Julian turned, a touch of awkwardness crossing his face. "Making breakfast. I figured you'd need some energy after all those late nights." Ivy raised an eyebrow, unable to hide her surprise. However, she said nothing more and quietly sat at the table. When Julian placed a plate of eggs and toast in front of her, she smiled faintly. The first smile Julian had seen from her in a long time. In the days that followed, Julian began spending more time with Ivy. He often stopped by her study to check on what she was working on. One afternoon, as they sat together in the living room, Julian placed a folder in front of Ivy. "This is a project I'm considering," he said, his tone calmer than usual, "but I'm not sure about its potential." Ivy picked up the folder, skimming through its contents before asking, "Why do you think it's not worth investing in?" Julian shrugged. "It's too small. I don't have the time for projects like this." Ivy looked at him, her eyes glinting with determination. "Sometimes the smallest things hold the greatest opportunities. You just need enough patience and the right perspective." Julian leaned back slightly, silently observing her as she continued to analyze the project. Within him, a sense of admiration began to flicker. As time went on, Julian realized that Ivy wasn't just a resilient woman. She had a sharp intellect. She wasn't afraid to challenge herself and always sought to turn obstacles into opportunities. Julian began to change his approach. Instead of focusing solely on his work, he spent time sitting with Ivy, discussing the projects she was working on. Every time he saw her eyes light up as she explained her ideas, he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. One evening, after Ivy presented a business plan for a small project she had completed, Julian looked at her intently before saying, "You've surprised me. Not only have you salvaged things I once dismissed as worthless, but you've also shown me how much I've overlooked." Ivy didn't respond immediately. She simply nodded, but within her, a warm, unfamiliar feeling began to spread. The small changes in Julian's behavior gradually made Ivy feel less distant. The prepared breakfast in the mornings, the evenings spent discussing work together, or even the attentive gaze he gave her whenever she spoke. All of these made her realize that Julian was no longer the cold, self-centered man she had once thought him to be. One late evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Julian spoke unexpectedly. "Thank you for being here, Ivy. Without you, I don't think I would have realized I needed to change." Ivy looked at him, a mixture of surprise and emotion welling up inside her. But she didn't reply. She was still cautious, still keeping her distance. While Julian had changed, she knew it wouldn't be easy to erase the barriers between them. Yet for a fleeting moment, she felt it might be possible. And somewhere deep inside, Julian also began to realize that she wasn't just a woman passing through his life. She might hold the key to helping him become a better version of himself. The winter night was silent, broken only by the wind howling outside the window. The soft light from the desk lamp cast shadows on the wall, highlighting Ivy's silhouette. She sat with her head bowed, her eyes focused on an old worn notebook. Its pages were filled with notes, sketches, and plans, the fragments of dreams she once cherished before her life fell apart. Ivy looked up when she heard footsteps. Julian entered, holding 2 cups of steaming coffee. His gaze hesitated as he saw her, thoughtful and distant. Placing the cups on the table, he sat across from her, his voice softer than usual. "What are you working on?" Ivy didn't answer immediately. Instead, she quietly slid the notebook across the table toward him. Julian opened it, his eyes scanning the densely written notes and rough sketches, each line radiating passion and determination. "This is the project I want to realize," Ivy said, her voice soft but resolute. "A center for the homeless, not just a shelter, but a place where they can find jobs, learn skills, and rebuild their lives." Julian sat still, taking it in. Her words, the clarity of her ideas, struck something inside him. This wasn't just a woman trying to cling to life. This was someone determined to rebuild her world. "Do you think you can pull it off?" he asked, half skeptical, half curious. Ivy met his gaze head-on, her eyes shining with resolve. "I don't know, but if I don't try, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Julian stayed silent. A strange feeling rose within him, a blend of admiration and shame. Slowly he nodded. "All right, I'll help you." The beginning was tough. Julian, with his connections and influence, opened doors Ivy couldn't have accessed on her own. He arranged meetings with sponsors, introduced her to nonprofit organizations. At first, Julian helped out of a sense of obligation, but soon he realized it was Ivy's relentless passion that made it impossible for him to stay on the sidelines. One evening, after a long day of meetings with investors, Ivy sat wearily on the steps outside the building. Julian handed her a bottle of water and quietly sat down beside her. "You're good at telling your story," he said, breaking the silence. Ivy turned to him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when you talk about what you've been through, they believe you. You make them feel like you're not just trying to do charity, you truly understand them." Ivy smiled faintly. "That's not because of me. It's because they see we're doing the right thing." Julian nodded, but he knew. The difference was Ivy. The first charity center was established in an old rundown building Julian had purchased. On the first day of surveying the site, they stood in the middle of the empty, dusty space, with faint light streaming through windows covered in cobwebs. "This place will be beautiful when it's done," Ivy said, her voice brimming with hope. Julian looked at her. A strange, indescribable feeling stirred within him. He hadn't expected to feel this kind of excitement, not for the project itself, but because of the way Ivy saw the world. One late night, Julian passed by Ivy's office and saw her still engrossed in her documents. The dim yellow light from her desk lamp illuminated her face, highlighting her bright eyes and the tired yet determined lines etched on her features. He paused, a heavy feeling settling in his chest. "You don't have to work this hard," he said softly. Ivy looked up, offering a faint smile. "I do. This is what I believe in." Julian said nothing more. He walked away, but his mind remained restless. For the first time, he wondered if he had been selfish in pulling her into his life. In the days that followed, Julian began involving himself more deeply in the project. One time they handed out meals to the homeless at a small church. Ivy stood behind the counter, her warm smile lighting up the room as she served each meal. Julian stood nearby, observing how she listened attentively to the stories of those receiving the food. An elderly woman clasped Ivy's hand, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "You don't know how much this means to me." Ivy gently squeezed the woman's hand, replying in a soft voice, "It's nothing. I just hope things get better for you." Julian stood watching, his heart tightening. He had once thought empathy was a luxury, but now he realized that empathy was the most essential thing of all. On the way home, Julian broke the silence. "You've made me realize how selfish I've been." Ivy turned to him, surprised. Before she could respond, Julian continued, "Thank you for helping me change." Ivy gave a small smile, her voice gentle. "I didn't do anything. You changed yourself." Julian said nothing more, but a warmth spread through him, as though in the bitter cold of winter he had found a small glimmer of light. One late evening, when Ivy returned home exhausted from the small office where she was working on plans for the charity project, she was greeted by the inviting aroma of something delicious wafting through the house. It was unusual, as Julian typically worked late and rarely set foot in the kitchen. She walked into the dining room, and the first sight left her stunned. Julian, wearing a simple apron, was bustling around the table with dishes. She stared at him, unable to hide her surprise. "You, what are you doing?" she asked. Julian turned around holding a wooden spoon, looking slightly flustered, but still trying to maintain his composure. "Can't I cook?" Ivy burst into laughter, the first time she had ever seen Julian, the usually cold and arrogant man, appear so approachable. The dining table was set with steaming soup and a few simple dishes. "I thought you might be hungry after working all day," Julian explained, then awkwardly added, "Don't expect much. This is the first time I've cooked without burning anything." Ivy looked at him for a long moment, and her exhaustion seemed to melt away. A warmth began to spread through her, hard to describe. She sat down and tasted the soup, her eyes lighting up. "This is better than I expected. Maybe you should consider a career change," she teased. Julian smiled, feeling an unfamiliar lightness seeing her happy. In that moment, amidst the aroma of food and the warm light of the overhead lamp, something inside him seemed to shift. One evening, as they worked late together, Julian reached for a document on the table and accidentally brushed Ivy's hand. The light touch, fleeting as it was, startled them both. Julian looked up, his blue eyes reflecting a hint of confusion. Ivy quickly pulled her hand back, but her heart raced wildly. For a few seconds they stared at each other in silence, the air between them heavy with unspoken tension. Julian cleared his throat, breaking the stillness. "I think we need a break. How about some tea?" Ivy simply nodded, unable to meet his gaze. But as Julian turned away, she allowed herself a small smile. That fleeting moment left a strange, inexplicable sensation lingering in her heart. In the days that followed, Julian began to spend more time paying attention to Ivy. He was no longer the man who only buried himself in work. Occasionally, he even took small actions to take care of her. One morning, Ivy woke up to find a plate of sandwiches and a steaming cup of tea on the dining table. Beside it was a note written in Julian's neat handwriting, "For someone who stayed up late working." Ivy laughed, feeling a sense of being cared for in a way she never expected. Her heart seemed to melt at these subtle yet meaningful gestures. As for Julian, he couldn't deny the growing feelings within him. Every time he saw Ivy smile, a strange warmth spread through him. Those small gestures, the accidental touches, and the shared moments gradually brought them closer together. One evening, as Ivy quietly adjusted Julian's crooked tie before he stepped out, their eyes met for a fleeting moment. Julian instinctively held her hand and softly said, "Thank you for being here." Ivy looked at him, her eyes brimming with emotion. For the first time, she didn't feel like a woman trapped in a forced marriage, but rather someone who was genuinely valued. They didn't exchange any more words, but the gentle squeeze of Julian's hand spoke volumes. Their affection didn't grow from grand gestures or flowery promises, but from the little things, from tender care, silent support, and moments where they truly saw each other. Ivy realized that behind Julian's cold exterior was a warm heart, and Julian understood that Ivy's presence had reshaped how he viewed life. Two people, once strangers and opposites, now fit together like two unexpected puzzle pieces, forming a bond full of emotion and meaning. And deep inside, both Julian and Ivy knew that this marriage, which began as an agreement, had become something irreplaceable in their lives. Today, another Christmas season arrived, and the living room of Julian's mansion gleamed like a masterpiece. The light from the crystal chandelier illuminated the room, creating an ambiance that was both cozy and powerful. The Christmas tree was meticulously decorated with golden ribbons, vivid red ornaments, and a sparkling star atop. Classical Christmas melodies floated from the grand piano in the corner, adding to the majestic atmosphere. Guests, influential figures, and elites stood in small groups, chatting animatedly. Champagne glasses reflected the shimmering lights as they clinked together, producing a clear, melodic sound. Amid this flawless scene, Fiona's arrival brought a chill to the room, a silent prelude to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Fiona, dressed in a pristine white evening gown but with eyes full of calculation, stepped forward amidst the lively crowd. Raising her glass, her voice rang out, clear and calm, yet laced with challenge. "It's wonderful that we can all gather here today, isn't it? But I believe there's a more intriguing story everyone might like to hear." The murmurs ceased, and every gaze in the room turned toward Fiona. Julian, standing beside Ivy, immediately tensed. He felt every muscle in his body tighten. Ivy, though unsure of Fiona's intentions, couldn't ignore the rising unease within her. Fiona continued, her cold eyes sweeping over Julian before resting on Ivy. "We're all curious about this remarkable woman, aren't we? The one Julian loves so much that he married her in haste. But I wonder, is everything truly as romantic as it seems?" Ivy froze but maintained her composure. Julian placed his hand on her arm as if to offer strength, though he knew a storm was inevitable. Fiona stepped closer, her gaze piercing through Ivy. "I did a little digging, and it's fascinating to learn that she, Julian's perfect wife, was once a homeless woman." A wave of shock rippled through the room. Whispers and murmurs filled the air as skeptical and judgmental eyes turned toward Ivy. She felt the room's atmosphere grow stifling, but she refused to bow her head. Fiona didn't stop, her voice growing sharper with each word. "And what's even more remarkable is that this marriage is nothing more than a contract. That's right, Julian paid her to pretend to be his wife, a perfect performance to deceive us all." The room erupted into murmurs and gasps. Some guests were visibly shocked, while others looked on with thinly veiled disdain. Julian clenched Ivy's hand tightly, his gaze burning with anger as he turned toward Fiona. "Fiona, that's enough." But she refused to stop. A smirk spread across her face, triumphant and cruel. "Julian, do you deny it? Or do you also find it amusing that your entire family has been deceived?" Ivy faces the humiliation. Ivy took a deep breath, steadying her voice despite the trembling in her chest. Gently pulling her hand free from Julian's, she straightened her posture, her eyes blazing with pride. Ignoring the judgmental stares, she spoke, her words deliberate and unwavering. "Yes, I was homeless, and yes, I agreed to this arrangement, but I am not ashamed of it. I did what I had to in order to survive, to have a chance to rebuild my life." She turned to Fiona, her gaze as sharp as a blade. "You can use my past as a weapon, but it doesn't make me small. It only reveals your own pettiness and cruelty." Fiona opened her mouth to respond, but Ivy had already turned to face Julian's family, her voice steady despite a slight tremor. "I don't need anyone's acceptance here. I know who I am, and I am proud of the strength it took to stand here today." Julian stepped forward, his expression no longer cold, but filled with determination and raw emotion. Standing beside Ivy, he took her hand again, addressing the room with conviction. "Fiona is right. I made this arrangement because I wanted to avoid responsibility. Ivy lost everything, yet she didn't give up. Meanwhile, I, someone who had everything, lived selfishly, avoiding what mattered. If I had to choose again, I'd still choose her. And what Fiona doesn't understand is, everything has changed." He turned to Ivy, his voice soft, yet filled with emotion. "Ivy, I love you. Not because of the agreement, not because of any plan, but because of who you are. You've shown me what it means to live a life of meaning. You've made me want to be a better man." Julian's words brought the room to a stunned silence. Fiona froze, unable to believe what she had just heard. Meanwhile, Ivy felt as if the world around her disappeared, leaving only Julian and his heartfelt confession. She looked at Julian, her eyes brimming with tears. Her heart wavered, but her mind urged caution. Taking a deep breath, her voice was soft but resolute. "Julian, I don't know if I can trust you completely yet, but I need time. Time to see if this love is strong enough to overcome everything." Julian nodded, his gaze filled with patience and sincerity. "I'll wait, Ivy. As long as it takes, I'll prove my love, not with words, but with actions." Ivy said nothing more. She stepped back, turned, and walked out of the room, leaving Julian standing silently amidst the chaos. Though Fiona had succeeded in revealing the secret, she felt hollow. She hadn't expected Julian to so openly defend Ivy, nor did she anticipate the genuine love he had for her. In that moment, Fiona realized she had lost. What do you think of this story? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. A few days later, After the charity center event had concluded, Julian and Ivy returned to the home they had shared for over a year. However, the atmosphere between them was unusually heavy. Ivy sat quietly on the sofa in the living room, her gaze distant as she stared out through the large window. The streetlights outside reflected against the glass, casting faint, flickering shadows across her face. Julian stood at a distance, gripping his thick coat tightly. He knew what was running through Ivy's mind. Throughout the evening, even as she smiled and chatted with the people at the center, he had sensed the hesitation in her every gesture. Julian stepped closer, pulling a chair to sit across from Ivy. The silence between them was so profound that only the ticking of the clock on the wall could be heard. "Ivy," Julian finally spoke, his voice deep and serious. "You're planning to leave, aren't you?" Ivy flinched slightly. Her eyes wavered under the weight of his direct question, but then she nodded, her voice soft. "I think it's the right time, Julian. I've fulfilled my part of the agreement. There's nothing left to keep me here." Her words, though gentle, pierced Julian like daggers. He took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. "Nothing left? Do you really believe that? After everything we've been through together?" Julian leaned forward, his eyes filled with a rare desperation. "Ivy, I know this marriage started as an arrangement. I dragged you into my life for selfish reasons. But do you know something? You've changed me. You've taught me how to care, how to see the value of life beyond numbers and profits. I can't imagine what my life would be like without you." Ivy turned away, trying to hide her reddened eyes. She let out a bitter laugh, her voice tinged with irony. "Julian, you don't need me anymore. You're strong enough now to change your own life. And me, I can't stay just because of gratitude or pity." Julian shook his head firmly. "It's not pity. This is love, Ivy. I love you. I love everything about you. Your strength, your compassion, even your past, which you've never been ashamed of. I know I was wrong not to say this sooner, but I don't want to lose you. Not because of a contract, but because I can't live without you." Ivy remained silent. Julian's words shook her deeply, but they also left her uncertain. She couldn't deny that she had started to love him, from the clumsy breakfasts he prepared, to the way he always supported her charitable projects, and the warm look in his eyes when they worked together. But fear lingered in her heart. She was afraid that everything they had was only fleeting. "Julian, I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know if we can start over. I'm used to living without relying on anyone. And you've always had everything. I'm afraid I won't be able to keep up with your world." Julian stood up, moving closer to Ivy. He knelt in front of her, taking her hands and holding them tightly. "You don't need to keep up with my world. We'll create our own world, one where we both belong, Ivy. Please give us a chance." Julian's plea made Ivy waver. She looked into his eyes and saw sincerity and a love she could no longer deny. But before making her decision, she knew she needed to set one condition. "All right," she said after a long pause. "I'll stay, but only if you promise me one thing." Julian nodded without hesitation. "Anything, Ivy, as long as you stay." Ivy met his gaze, her voice gentle yet firm. "We must do everything as equals, Julian. No one above the other. I don't want to become just a part of your world. I want us to build a life together, one we can both be proud of." Julian smiled, a smile filled with joy. He nodded, his voice tender. "I promise, Ivy, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you." That night, the two sat together on the sofa, planning their future projects. The room was filled with relief and hope. The mugs of hot cocoa on the table gradually grew cold, but the warmth in their eyes for each other grew stronger than ever. Ivy felt a sense of safety she hadn't experienced since her family went bankrupt. And for Julian, it was the first time in his life that he felt a true sense of peace in his heart. They both knew that challenges still lay ahead, but this time they were ready to face them together, not just as partners in work, but as life companions, as true equals in the journey ahead. 1 year later, on Christmas Eve, the Homeless Support Center, co-founded by Julian and Ivy, hosted its first event. The space was filled with warm light from twinkling fairy lights, and the aroma of cookies and hot cocoa wafted through the air. Homeless individuals and their families sat around simple yet abundant tables. The joyful laughter and chatter melted away the chill of winter. Ivy, dressed in a simple knit dress, moved through the crowd, personally serving food to each person. From a distance, Julian watched her with loving eyes. He approached her, gently taking her hand. "We did it, Ivy. Look at them. You've created a miracle. Not just for them, but for me as well." Ivy smiled, her eyes shimmering with joy. "No, Julian, we did this. And this is just the beginning. I want us to do so much more." In that moment, as snowflakes silently fell outside the window, Julian and Ivy stood hand in hand. Julian suddenly knelt down, his movements deliberate and resolute. He pulled a small navy velvet box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple yet elegant ring. The diamonds sparkled, reflecting the warm lights around them. Ivy raised her hands to cover her mouth, her eyes wide with surprise. Her breath caught in her chest. "Ivy," Julian began, his voice brimming with love and hope. "I can't imagine my life without you. You're not just the woman I love, you're the one I want to build a future with. Please stay by my side forever. Will you marry me?" Ivy was silent, tears welling up in her eyes. She looked at Julian, the man who had once been arrogant and cold, now kneeling before her with an expression filled with everything she had ever hoped for in a partner: love, respect, and commitment. She took a deep breath, feeling her heart race, not from pain or hesitation this time, but from sheer happiness. "Julian," she said, her voice trembling, "there was a time when I thought we would never get here. I was afraid, I wanted to leave. But you changed my mind. You showed me what true love is." She paused, tears streaming down her face, but her smile shone with radiance. "Yes, I will," Ivy whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Julian stood, a beaming smile lighting up his face. With trembling hands, he gently slid the ring onto Ivy's finger. As soon as the ring rested securely on her hand, Julian pulled her into a tight embrace. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the overwhelming joy they felt in their hearts. "Thank you," Julian whispered in her ear. "Thank you for giving me the chance to love and be loved." Ivy rested her head on his shoulder, her soft voice carrying her feelings. "And thank you, Julian, for giving me a family, a place to belong." Their love was not just built on empathy and respect, but also on shared values and a mutual desire to bring goodness into the world. As the evening's festivities wound down, the light from the center continued to shine brightly against the cold, dark night. It stood as a beacon of true love, tireless effort, and the unyielding hope Julian and Ivy had spread to everyone around them. Thank you for listening to this story. Please rate our tale and don't forget to subscribe, like, and share it with your friends.